let's test your compression hearing skills, because this will be important later in the video. Can you hear the difference between these two? Before I reveal, let's do one more time. Can you hear the difference between these two? For people who can hear the difference in both examples, congratulations! You are suffering from snake oil.
They're all the same.
For people who haven't seen yet, we have been doing news in this channel for a while. But now, we are moving it to a new channel. It's called Tune In. You can find the links on the description and comments below. You don't see me ranting in my channel, but this is something that I have to rant, and that is how plugin companies manipulate especially beginner producers to believe that compressors are key to get certain type of color or certain type of saturation. And this really bothers me a lot. The compressors give you tiny amount of saturation, but they will mess up your dynamics if you don't know how to use them. Maybe this can open your eyes a little bit. Here, just a single sine wave, and I have a tube compression on top. So tube compressors tend to give character, form, blah blah blah, whatever, right? I want to take a look at the span without single sine wave, no harmonics whatsoever, and I'm turning on the tube compressor, and you are seeing around 10 dB gain reduction. That's a lot of gain reduction. The compressor, you will go probably 3 to 6 or something like that. This is really a lot. But even with a compressor that has a lot of color, this is the harmonic that we are getting out of the sine wave. So you see how small that is. Just give you a rough comparison. If you take same sine wave, but this time just use one of my favorite saturation plugin, Multiculture. In this case, I'm using Arturia's own emulation. Look at drive. Non-existent, and we are in P1, one of the more conservative option. Do you see how much saturation it gets? Do you see the difference? So the plugin companies sell this tiny insignificant amount of color, and this really lead a lot of beginner producers that the compressors are the magical tools that make their sound better. And it is completely the other way around. It is a tool that make them put their focus on wrong things and delay their development. Now the rant is done. Let me show you how compressors actually ruin your mixes. The most common way compressors messes up your mix is actually messing up your drums. This is very common. I see it all the time. Listen to these drums. Now they are quite nice, already saturated and so on and so forth, but if you take a look at the waveform, they are clipped heavily, and let's say we want to introduce a bit more cells on it, like the plugin manufacturers use, right? What a lot of producers, especially beginners, do is like just slap a compressor without thinking too much it. For example, let's take a VCA slap. A little bit saturation, right? It's nice. Here is what your new audio looks like. It looks ridiculous, isn't it? It is due to the compressor not being fast enough and not catching every transient, ending up this super weird transient behavior in your drums. This will be especially big problem when you try to master your track, because a lot of things start to get clipped or get distorted. Let's say you use something like Fed compressor, which is faster compressor. Here is the result. Now, it is definitely better. Compressor is still acting faster, but you will still have this sometimes awkward transient here and there, and again you will have problem with loud mixes. You still need to actually clip this one a bit to put it into order. But what does that mean? Are we not going to use compressors at all? No, of course you could fine tune this one to get to the proper shape. But we are living in 2024 and there are tons of tools available. If all we wanted to add a little bit dynamics, a bit variation, we could have just used transient shaper. Much easier to understand, especially for the beginners. Use something like Neutron 4, you can use any transient shaper, right? Let's add a little bit attack and decrease the sustain a little bit. Much better looking waveform. You see, rather than diving into those billion different compressor methods and try to fiddle with all your parameters, you could have just bring a transient shaper and you will be already fine enough. 40-50 years ago, we didn't have these tools, but it is 2024. Using a saturation plugin together with the transient shaper is actually much easier for cases like this. So don't let compressors mess your drums. If you're enjoying the video up now, there is one thing that you can do for me. Like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps a ton. When you compress audio signal, you bring everything close to each other. That means that the things that was not audible before may get audible, and when you compress a lot of things in your track, it can really muddy up and ruin mixes. Let's say we have this innocent off-hat loop. If you take a look at EQ, there is some stuff over here but it's low in the volume. But the moment we start compress this one and make it more sustained, everything gets louder and all this dirt starts to build up. This effect is even more significant if you are using more drastic compression, like OTT. If you like to use a lot of OTTs in your sound, all that low and high end mud, all this unwanted sound gets really louder and louder. Take a look at this. Again, we have a little bit stuff here. What happens if we put an OTT? Everything starts to peak much higher. Also, they are sustained much longer. So overall, this sound is much muddier than it was before. If you do this couple of times with different instruments, it ruins the mix and makes everything super muddy and unlistenable. Pick your battles carefully and try to at least clean up some unwanted frequencies before and after the compression. I oftentimes sound like OTT hater in this channel, but I feel like OTT is causing more harm than good, especially for the beginner and intermediate producers, because they don't know what they are doing and they slap OTT on everywhere and they end up this super weird, mushy, extra hyped mix at the end that doesn't sound good at all.
Sounds bad. It is bad.
So why does it happen? Let me show you. I have a noise, quite flat, isn't it? Look what happens when you put an OTT. We boost almost every frequency, so you are immediately fooled by gain increase. Because it gets louder, you believe that the sound gets better. But more importantly, OTT is kind of built after that exciting sound of EDM. If you take a look at the consumer headphones, you will see that highs and lows are often boosted so that you get this exciting, nice to listen sound. And OTT kind of mimics this one. Introduce this kind of dip, right? And then adds these really exciting highs. The mid overall doesn't change necessarily that much, but everything gets a bit compressed. This excitement makes OTT problematic because you are exciting everything in the exactly same band. On top of this, the biggest issue is like many producers wouldn't use it in 100%. That means that you will start to introduce phasing issues because you have 3 bands and 2 crossover points, which will introduce phase change. And if you have more elegant sounds, like for example here, quite aggressive, but the moment you introduced OTT, hear how the character of the sound changed quite a bit. You have these mids pushed down and highs are pushed up but still compressed. And people tend to use this like, okay, what if I use like 40% wet, get best of the both worlds. You are fooled by the loudness. That 40% mix is 3 dB increase in the volume and you immediately go for the louder part. Plus, you lose all the dynamics. It sounds really gets super artificial and bad. The one thing that OTT works really nice is, for example, if you have a reverb and you use it as a sound design tool to squash everything together, and you will hear that type of sounds a lot, for example, in Future Rain, right? But for most of the case, especially for the beginners and intermediate producers, really try to avoid using OTT until you are confident with your compression skills and you know what to do. Otherwise, you will just create more and more problems. Better alternative to OTT, Ableton Stocks Overdrive, which will help you much better target the area that you would work. In this case, for example, let's say I just want to get the sound bright. And then the one thing that I would suggest, like, try to be still wary of gain compensation. So you can create something like utility afterwards, and then you can group them together, just assign the gain to the knob over here, so that whatever you do, you can gain compensate afterwards. Much better alternative if you want to get the distorted, more saturated sound on specific area of your sound. So the first way that compressors ruin your mixes is throwing into your master channel. First thing that you should remember with the compressor is that a compressor will be driven by the loudest point in your track. Listen to this track. Quite groovy in the dance track. In electronic dance music, the loudest point of your track will be almost when the kick hits, because then you will have both a transient and a low end at the same time. All those big peaks are the kicks, and then we have the smaller peaks, which are actually the toms, so secondary kicks. What do you think it happens if you throw a compressor on the master now, hoping for the magic sound? This. Do you see how compressor is almost entirely driven by the kick and sometimes from the tom sound, because those are the loudest point. The compressor behaves like a pump machine, down, up, down, up. This effect could be nice if you are going for those pumping techno track, but even then it is probably much suitable if you do it on your low end bass rather than the master channel, just to keep the percussions intact. Look how much it kills that groove feeling of the track and introduce so much pumpiness unnecessarily. The other thing is the gain reduction is just 3 dB, so it is quite subtle in the end, but even that small tiny change changes the character of your song already. Is there a way around this? Yes, there is always. In many compressors, you can either filter the incoming signal or sidechain your compressor. I could have done something like this, but even in that case, I think it's still better to use a compressor on the buses rather than masters, because again, many things can go wrong with the master channel.